We've got Jeffrey Gleason from U.S. Fish and Wildlife. Jeff drove all the way out from Florida yesterday just to come for this, so thank you very much. I really appreciate that. We all do. And also, Jeff's fun fact is that he grew up in a small agricultural town of less than 100 people in west central Iowa.
So before I get started, I'd like to acknowledge all of the GoMMAPPS Seabird science staff that are involved with this project, as well as a couple of service colleagues that I work pretty closely with, not only on the GoMMAPPS project, but with restoration throughout the Gulf, John Turpak and Randy Wilson. The bulk of this presentation, as the title suggests, will be related to GoMMAPPS, but the first 2 or 3 slides I'll touch on a couple of NRDAR topics. Thanks, Michael Seymour introduced some information that is relevant here as well. So I will touch on those topics primarily as they relate to bird restoration for those species breeding outside the Gulf, including pelagic seabirds. So yeah, so just a bit of background. Many of you know about this and understand it probably better than I do. Natural resource damage assessment. The photograph on the right or image on the right is simply a cover photo from the PDAR. NRDAR is unprecedented in scope and scale. 9 trustees, 5 federal, 5 state and federal, 4 federal, numerous categories of injured resources. Global settlement, April 2016, about 8.8 billion for restoration. There's a governance structure associated with this, the trustee council, the TIGs, and the individual trustee agencies. So yeah, many of you have probably seen this table in some way, shape, or form. The columns to the left, that gray shaded area, of course, is the restoration categories and types. Across the top are the trustee implementation groups, or TIGs. And the big part, or the body of the table, is the funding associated with each of those. So the important thing for seabirds restoration, particularly for pelagics and other bird species that breed outside the Gulf, the open ocean TIG is one of the buckets or pots. MAM dollars under the open ocean TIG is another potential source, particularly for monitoring and adaptive management for projects related to seabird restoration questions. From a the recent open ocean TIG draft restoration plan, RP1, there were 2 bird projects considered as preferred alternatives, a black tern project, as well as a common loon project. I was pretty heavily involved, to say, with the black tern project. That project is actually going to be doing work on the breeding grounds in the prairie pothole regions of the eastern Dakotas. And again, both of these are examples of bird restoration work outside the Gulf of Mexico. So just some points, now sort of transitioning to GoMMAPPS and how that might benefit or further inform NRDA or NRDAR, the actual restoration, the restoration planning component, monitoring and adaptive management, unknown conditions, the actual open evaluations, and of course, future spills. And again, Michael Seymour did a really good job of covering some of this information. This information is basically pulled from table 4.7-3 in the PDAR. The points that are most relevant to this discussion are the latter points. 15 of the top 20 species and 8 of the top 10 species with highest estimated losses are seabirds, either near shore or pelagic. Several of the top 20 species breed outside the Gulf of Mexico, and here are some examples. American white pelican, number 3 on the list, northern gannet, number 5, black tern, number 11, Audubon shearwater, number 13, and common loon, number 14. And not surprisingly, it is pretty easy to see that seabirds as a taxa group were pretty heavily impacted by the spill. So yeah, transitioning to the GoMMAPPS project and my involvement with that. So the GoMMAPPS, sort of the impetus for that GoMMAPPS project was a lack of research and monitoring data in Gulf offshore waters for living marine resources, including abundance, distribution, habitat use, and behavior for the 3 taxa groups that are covered under GoMMAPPS, marine mammals, sea turtles, and seabirds. Those are 4 bullet points to the right-hand side of the screen. I'll be talking primarily about just number 2 today, but yeah, they're basically Fish and Wildlife Service is the lead for the seabird component of GoMMAPPS. NOAA is the lead for the marine mammal component, and USGS is the lead for the sea turtle component. So there's, excuse me, the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management was the funder or funding source for this project, and they are also the action agency. By action agency, they're the ones making a decision about offshore oil and gas, as well as other alternative energy opportunities, permitting in the Gulf of Mexico and the OCS, the Outer Continental Shelf. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service is a funding recipient for this project, but we're also a consulting agency. The consulting agency work is done through the Lafayette ES office. So one of the reasons the data are needed, there's a regulatory nexus. And as a follow-up to that, we want to reduce the uncertainty regarding potential effects or impacts to avian resources related to offshore energy development in the OCS and in the Gulf of Mexico. That's primarily at this time related to oil and gas. So the overarching goal for this project, basically as per the contract from BOEM, we're going to collect broad-scale information on the distribution and abundance of seabirds in the Gulf of Mexico to inform seasonally and spatially explicit density estimates. Sort of looking at it from null hypothesis framework, the distribution, abundance, and diversity of seabirds is not influenced by the following things. The presence and density and the status of offshore oil platforms, proximal fisheries activities, microhabitat or forage indicators, oceanographic features, and broad-scale weather conditions. We will be considering these as we develop models of seabird distribution and abundance as the data continue to be collected. So for this one, our survey platforms are a combination of NOAA vessel surveys or vessels of opportunity, as well as aerial surveys using 2 Kodiak amphibious aircraft. The big difference in these 2 sort of survey platforms is, one, with the aerial surveys, we have complete flexibility regarding study design. And with the vessel surveys, we have no flexibility regarding study design. We are basically volunteers on vessels that have already, they have programmatic sort of surveys that they're doing, and we're just tagging along. So it's, from that aspect, we're pretty limited in what we can do on the study design side. So in the case of vessels of opportunity, there are dedicated GoMMAPPS marine mammal cruises. There was one in the summer of 2017, one in the winter of 2018, and one in the summer of 2018. As well, there are both spring and fall plankton surveys that we have observers on. And in 2017, we did do, I was on a vessel, a groundfish survey, but they spent 30 to 60 minutes on points for about 9 hours during the day. So there is very little time on transect to actually do observation work. So we're not doing that anymore. So for the aerial surveys, there are 2 surveys per year. The winter surveys, basically late January to late February, and the summer surveys are typically conducted in July. Well, this is the vessel survey team. Obviously a fair number of folks. I'm more of the administrative sort of admin side. I do get out and do some vessels, Seabird survey work. My stomach is much better on a vessel than it is on a low-flying aircraft. After a couple of bad experiences on the aircraft, I think I'm physical experiences on the aircraft, I think I'm pretty much done with that. But yeah, initially for the vessel side, we had a relatively small starting pool of trained folks. We now have a much larger pool with which to draw. But yeah, that cost us a little bit of opportunity in 2017. So just some preliminary, more effort related. So we use standard line transect Seabird survey methodology, Tasker et al., I think 1985, basically from the flying bridge aboard NOAA vessels, and most of them are out of Pascagoula, Mississippi. We use program Seabird and enter directly the data directly into laptops as birds are encountered. Basically 2 observers per vessel per trip. Ideally, all birds are entered into one of 4 distance bins using handheld rangefinders as described by Heinemann, 1981. Related to effort, we lost 15 to 17 days in 2017 because we didn't have people or we had somebody cancel at the last minute. And then in 2018, we lost about 10 to 14 days due to vessel repairs, a potential government shutdown, and tropical storms. At the start of the project, we had actually anticipated or predicted about 320 to 330 total days at sea. I think in actuality, we're probably going to end up around 288, which is still a lot of time out in the water. So just some sort of a bit of comparison. The map or figure on the right-hand side sort of gives you the geographic footprint of the vessel surveys to date. Related to effort, there's clearly temporal variation, including no effort in November and December, and fairly limited effort in January, April, and June. Again, we're restricted based on availability of NOAA vessels. They don't do a lot of work in the winter and early spring for good reason. To date, related to effort, there was fairly obvious spatial variation effort with far less effort in shallower shelf waters, particularly in the eastern planning area off the coast of Florida. Again, to reiterate, we were constrained or otherwise limited to where we go depending on the NOAA vessel's programmatic surveys. Let's see, so that figure to the left is basically sort of a comparison between the NRDAR bird study number 6 vessel work and the GoMMAPPS. You can see there's GoMMAPPS, we put in quite a bit more time, as well as the transect distances surveyed are quite a bit different. So effort-wise, we're pretty good, but there are some spatial temporal restrictions that we need to address moving forward. Here's just an example of a track leg from one of the surveys done. The Marine Mammal Cruise, leg number 3 in 2017. And this one is the Winter Marine Mammal Survey, Marine Mammal Cruise, leg 1, that was done in 2018. So a little bit about vessel survey, the Seabird distribution. The current totals, we have about 35,000 bird encounters in our database so far, and that's going to continue to go up. About 65 species total. Of those, about 45 to 50 are seabirds. Again, analyses and models will be coming to get at distribution and abundance. What we need to make clear on this slide is this one here is not corrected for effort. And as you know, effort is pretty important consideration in the overall analysis of these sorts of data. We will be collecting data in April, May, and September and October. And you can see there's some pretty big blobs right around Pascagoula and coming around the mouth of the river. That's not a surprise since that's a primary exit and entry port. So that's not a surprise. So one of the interesting things that we've seen from our early work, black-capped petrel in the Gulf of Mexico, historically, traditionally, the species seem to be considered accidental, extremely rare, or vagrant in the Gulf. But the data we've collected to date, as well as NRDAR study number 6, indicates that is not. It doesn't appear to be the case. And at the time the status assessment was in prep, they had no information, sighting information for this species in the Gulf of Mexico. So we provided them with some data on that. So yeah, as many of us know from the pretty extensive species list from table 4.7-3, there's a lot of pretty diverse suite of seabirds using the Gulf from really a bunch of different places. So that's pretty cool. One of the things that we've clearly noticed is seasonal species assemblage sort of switches are pretty distinct. In the wintertime, it seems like northern gannets, common loons, herring gulls, and ring-billed gulls, as well as several species of diving ducks in the nearshore environment are pretty important. In the summertime, that changes pretty dramatically, and that's when you get your diversity really tends to spike relative to seabirds at that time. So switching over to the aerial survey and trying to speed this up a little bit. This is the crew. Barrett's been involved with the aerial survey team as well. 2017 was a pilot year for this project, and the crew was based out of Houma, and we wanted to really compare two potential different designs of standard line transect methodology and more of a 40 hexagon based sampling approach using the EPA hexagons. So quickly, we learned a lot in 2017, both from a logistical, operational, and biological side. We were really concerned about all the platforms and how that might affect the design itself and safety and all the helicopter helicopter traffic and that kind of stuff. It was not as big an issue as we first thought it might be. And from 2017, we modified our design a little bit, moving into 2018 for the winter survey. The one thing I would say in the difference between the winter surveys and the summer surveys, ideal conditions, we can complete the entire Gulf of Mexico from Brownsville to the Florida Keys in about 10 to 12 days of survey time in the summer. In the wintertime, not surprisingly, with all the fog that we have, 2018 took about 30 some days, I think. Well, about 30 days, somewhere in there. So it's almost double. There's a lot of downtime, a lot of probing for open spaces, trying to find, trying to get around the fog, that kind of thing. So this is just a little bit about the design. That's kind of, the figure kind of shows you how we set up the design, and that's basically the design we're using moving forward. So several hexagons together and shorter transects sort of bisecting each of the hexagons. So there's basically a graphic or a plot of all the hexagon plots scattered across the Gulf of Mexico. And again, that's basically from the shoreline out to 50 nautical miles. So yeah, just some preliminary results. Approximately 5,400 nautical miles surveyed, all but one sample point was surveyed in winter 2018. Again, the species sort of list that we'd expect from the near shore. Let's see. Again, the lighter or warmer colors represent higher densities, and this is from the winter survey. Almost there. So a couple of big things. Monitoring effort spans from Brownsville, Texas to the Florida Keys and out to the EEZ. We're collecting data through 2019 and potentially a winter survey, aerial survey in 2020. As we look at some of the metrics and start comparing it with some of the other historical efforts, we're really getting to that point where we're thinking this is probably the largest seabird monitoring effort in the Gulf of Mexico for that offshore environment. The clear linkages to and value for NRDA, and obviously provides BOEM with additional data to fill critical information gaps from a regulatory perspective. So, very good. Thank you very much.